I come from philosophy. I'm not a scientist or a science educator, but I've been working with science educators for some time now, so I dare to speak about the interface between teaching philosophy and teaching science. I would like to thank Ana Paula and everyone here at the university. It's very important for me, and I think for all of us, to share experiences with colleagues from other places, Northern Hemisphere too, but especially with our peers from CONESUL. So that's good. I think that's a great idea. It's a place that gives us the opportunity to interchange, to discuss, and to have feedback from colleagues. So that's what I'll expect from this conference, that I can get feedback from all of you. So, what is evaluation? What do we mean when we talk about assessment or accountability? These are usually complex and unsettling problems that may remind us of the well-known dictum of Augustinus, the philosopher, not our colleague who is not there today, about time. What then is time, said Augustinus, and we may say, what is evolution? If no one asks me, I know what it is. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I don't know. And later, it is a deep question and has no simple answer. I think we may agree with Augustinus on time and on evaluation as well. However, evaluating is a constant part of our work as teachers and as researchers, and most conscientious teachers and educational researchers feel, at least sometimes, prompted to take the time to reflect on it and try to explain it, at least for themselves. I explained I come from philosophy. That's why I'm reading. So this is what I said to do a couple of years ago, when in an informal conversation with a colleague of mine, called Alicia, we shared our doubts and joys about our parallel workshops on history and philosophy of science. We worked at Instituto del Profesorado J.V. González. We have been keeping our conversation going on, so you will find out that sometimes I use the plural we, not just out of the personalizing my writing, but in the common sense, actual meaning of the word. Pre-service biology teachers at Instituto J.V. González take a compulsory year-long workshop on history and philosophy of science, especially biology. Students are expected to read, reflect, and debate on several historical, historiographic, and philosophical questions related to natural science and especially to the life sciences. Becoming a secondary teacher in Argentina has two possible routes. One of them goes through university. That's where I teach philosophy, to teachers to be in philosophy. The other route goes through a different set of institutions solely oriented to educational careers, called Institutos de Formación Docente, that provide a stronger emphasis on general and special education issues and less on disciplinary content and practice. The university route takes 6 years. The Instituto route takes 4 to 5 years. Per-service biology teachers and Instituto González take a 5 years program preparing to be either or both high school and Institutos teachers. Biology education courses and teaching education courses belong to the same department, and the curriculum destines 67% of course hours to disciplinary content, 18% to educational theory, and 15% to practicum. Students take a course in introductory philosophy at the 5th and 6th semesters, and at the 7th and 8th semesters, and at the 9th and 10th, they go through 2 courses on biology education, and parallel to that, they take the workshop on history and philosophy of biology. But sadly, however, this distribution is not mandatory, and several students do not follow the expected sequence due to multiple reasons, such as workplace or family responsibilities. The workshop requires students to assist to a weekly 2-hour class. They are expected to be highly active and work collaboratively in small groups with an operational purpose. First classes are destined to learning a corpus of more or less classic epistemological and set in a context of a few historical cases. However, as the year progresses and groups start to choose a particular case to work upon, diverse epistemological questions arise, and different groups may start inquiry on different philosophical problems. The workshop is designed on the premise that its students are not scientists, historians, or philosophers to be, but soon to be science teachers. Therefore, a careful balance is looked for, intending to draw from philosophical and historical sources to enrich a better understanding of NOS that will reflect in their future teaching practice. We aim at critical acquisition and appraisal of historical and philosophical tools in order to contextualize and analyze the emergence of problems, the growth of knowledge, and the attributes of scientific praxis in biology. They are expected to employ those same tools in order to connect biology to other human endeavors, to social demands, and to the public understanding of science. For instance, they work on the celebrated case of Ignaz Semmelweis. They read 9 different texts. 2 of those texts are mandatory, the classic example of Hempels. They see 4 videos, including, I don't know whether you know that, but this video from Cinnamon, That Mothers May Live, won the Oscar in 1939, and it's the story of Semmelweis. Highly emotional, just the title tells you that. And they had a guided assignment comparing at least 2 other texts and 2 videos on relevant criteria. So that's the kind of activities they do. With these aims in mind, in order to pass the course, the workshop program requires them to A, write in groups a historical short story or vignette about a relevant episode in biology or medicine history informed by a well-founded epistemological perspective. B, a poster that displays the historiographical and epistemological decisions that went into writing the vignette. Students are free to choose historical episodes, though they are encouraged to select locally or regionally relevant ones. For instance, this is a list of possible issues some students have already worked on. The ones in rows are Argentinian scientists, and in the last line you can see other possible themes. Academic communities share particular styles, patterns of reading and writing. Peculiar rhetorical styles share vocabularies, frameworks, and models. These tacit and recognized assumptions of academic communities tend to be transparent to experts, but hard to deal with for novices. They are not innate capacities, but have to be taught and learned. A relevant aspect of the workshop is to provide opportunities for students to deal with first-hand philosophical and historical sources, to familiarize themselves with their epistemic and rhetorical specificities, and to try their hands at writing within a historical epistemological frame. So let's go back to my conversation with my friend and say that we were mainly satisfied with our students' work. They had made significant efforts in looking for and reading novel material. They have searched for and chosen themes. They had selected new bibliography. Some students, though not all of them, had found, read, and reported primary sources. A few students cited English language papers, and several of them conveyed interest in reading more deeply about the cases they had chosen and a changed outlook on the relevance of history and philosophy of science for science teaching. We had, however, come to detect some problems that we wanted to address. Problems went from formal ones, bad orthography, typos, punctuation, misuse of citation rules, to more substantial linguistic ones, such as lack of coherence or a pure use of connectors, rhetorical strategies inadequate for context or audience, use of informal or spontaneous linguistic registers, and to discipline-relevant ones, use of unwarranted emotional language, hagiographic or Whiggish stories, poor selection or evaluation of source material, tacit common sense views about NOS. So some students did not pass the course and others dropped out after trying to do the first draft of the vignette. We wanted to address these issues but did not want to resign our evaluation proposal. I would like to state here that we, in agreement with the institutional curriculum, take assessment, I'm going to do this here, in a broad sense, closely related to educational purpose. In this sense, assessment can be distinguished from grading, tests or essays, and from certifying knowledge or skills. It does not preclude grading or certifying, but it's not coextensive with them. This broad sense is sometimes labeled alternative assessment. Alternative now goes in anything we don't know how to call, which in a general way means considering it not as an afterthought located at the termination of the course, unit, or sequence, but as an integral part of the whole teaching and learning process. Alternative assessment also emphasizes performance in the sense of actual tasks that encompass the ends of education. It has been said that what is aimed at is assessment for learning instead of assessment of learning. Moreover, alternative assessment diverges from the traditional style in several ways. It does not yield Gauss curves, and it is much less adept at selecting and classifying students. It operates on the perhaps over-optimistic notion that everyone in the class can learn and make good grades, though probably not at the same time or with the same rhythm. It does not consider errors, especially systematic errors, as faults to be punished or holes to be filled, but rather as interesting objects for analysis and interpretation. In Perrenoud words, it tries to resist the idea that, and I quote, evaluation is not a medieval torture, it is a later contraption, but born with the collège around 17th century. The idea is to assess what is going on in order to better understand what has happened so far, what we are aiming for, what do we need to get there, what must be changed. It means articulating value judgments in order to make well-founded decisions. That's a quote from de Quetal. This kind of formative evaluation aims at finding out where students are placed along an ongoing learning process, providing relevant information on strong and weak points, misunderstanding and successes, and helping them articulate research question or hypothesis. At the end of the workshop, there is a point where we formulate value judgments, and we, Alicia and I, make decisions whether students are to approve or fail the course. We grade a or many products, and consequently, we certify achievements. But that is not what is done during the writing learning process. This summative aspect of assessment has ethical and political undertones. On one side, failing a course, especially if the student has made a significant effort, may impact on her or his educational trajectory, and in the worst-case scenario, end up in the dropping out of the system. On the other side, letting pass a student that has not achieved the requisite competencies may have long-term impact in their future students. Taking this responsibility seriously means, among other things, thorough designing of evaluation instruments and careful and caring feedback of students. So we expected our students to learn, to interpret, evaluate, and write well-founded historical stories or vignettes as a powerful teaching tool. But usually students and many teachers' perception of assessment does not coincide with alternative assessment. They are generally familiarized with traditional evaluations. They take for granted the close links between traditional assessment and teaching practices and design. Perception of assessment demands drives teaching clearly when the teacher and the evaluator are not the same person. In that case, teachers are drawn to teach to the test, and mutatis mutandis, so do students to the test. Even if Olchin sometimes said that's no problem. Even when they are just one and the same person, teachers feel a constraint to avoid inconsistency between their teaching and their assessment practices. We accepted this fact, but however, we strove to make the most of the situation and set out to develop our assessment practices so as to fully make them into an integral part of our workshops. That is, we thought to make evaluation demands coincide closely with the aims and objectives of the workshop. We have chosen to forego tests and set out to deliberately align assessment tasks with the desired objectives and the relevant teaching and learning activities, and not the other way around. Hence the vignette and the later oral presentation. We did not want to forego this scheme, but to design teaching strategies that allowed us to preserve the positive outcomes while addressing the described shortcomings. So we needed new strategies. A possible way to go on, to go was working on the understanding of the criteria we used to evaluate the vignettes, or in Alchin words, on transparency. But sometimes, and we can see an example, I don't know if you can see that, I'm going to read it now. Evaluation criteria may be less than transparent to students. This is a very well-known vignette from Peanuts. I don't know how you call it in Brazil. Peanuts? Okay. So she says, "Así." That's a bad note. "Así." I got a C on my coat hanger sculpture. She had made a coat hanger sculpture. How could anyone get a C on a coat hanger sculpture? May I ask a question? Was I judged on the piece of the sculpture itself? If so, is it not true that time alone can judge a work of art? Or was I judged on my talent? And so on and so forth. She can be judged on her talent. She can be judged on what's ultimately their parents' fault, and so on and so forth. So she can't be judged. The end of the vignette is you can't judge something like a work of art. And our students sometimes say, well, how can you judge a narrative that we worked on? It's in some kind a piece of art. So how are you going to grade that? One of the features of thorough designing of the assessment had to relate with building clear and conceptually well-founded criteria that helped ground value judgments. As long as those criteria may be shared, they can be understood, reflected upon, and even rationally discussed by students, not the other way. This provides them with relevant hints to self-evaluate and revise their work while it is still in progress. To put it another way, our evaluation instruments should be valid in the sense that they had to be coherent with the purposes and objectives aimed at, and they had to be reliable in the sense of providing the clear criteria mentioned above. So we thought that making our criteria more transparent might be a good strategy on our way to dealing with the problems we had diagnosed. Working with rubrics seemed a good idea, and then we went a step further and decided to make students part of the creation of the rubric. A rubric is an assessment tool. I'm sorry, I suppose everyone knows, but just in case. It's an assessment tool that lists the criteria for an assignment and articulates, and that's important, gradations of quality for each criterion, from excellent to poor, or you may use whatever you like, letters, numbers, whatever. Educational rubrics should be distinguished from scoring ones. They are not just a checklist, which can be quite useful of themselves, but for every item in the list, rubrics, usually organized as a double entry table, describe desirable qualities as well as common difficulties in student work. Having a well-designed rubric can facilitate peer assessment, self-assessment, and teacher feedback. It clarifies learning goals, help design instruction that addresses those goals, communicate the goals to students, guide feedback on students' progress toward the goals, and judge final products in terms of the degree to which the goals are met. So we started reasonably early in the first semester by asking students to brainstorm a first list of criteria on two conditions. So they had to make a list of possible criteria. A, think about what they could consider a well-written piece of work. And B, take into consideration the historiographical and epistemological problems, concepts, and theories we have been discussing so far. Which of them should be taken into consideration in the writing of the vignette? Then we, the teachers, synthesize all the suggestions in a first draft. The second assignment had them revise this first draft, compare it with a sample, quite general rubric that had been agreed on by the whole faculty of the Departamento de Biología, and make suggestions, corrections, or additions on the basis of the new content we had been working on in the meantime. The third assignment was a peer assessment of the first draft of the vignette itself that had been due a week before. This assignment had two symmetrical ends: collaborate in refining the first draft and improving the rubric. In my class, the first assignment had the following results. Over 26 responses, the items addressed were, in order to address composition, coherence, orthography, the numbers refer to how many students thought this was important. Adequate rewriting, cohesion, order, proper citation. Regarding episode choice, originality, relevance, grounding. Regarding content, pertinence, argumentative soundness. Regarding sources, variety and reliability. Regarding rhetorics, impact, clarity, balanced technical and literary language. And 4 people talked about group integration, how they had worked as a group. The second assignment incorporated the need to make explicit historiographical choices, pay attention to coherence, include relevant graphics and images. Some students wonder on the proper balance between cognitive and emotional points of view. At this point, vignette writing was well underway, and rhetorical issues such as defining the needs and interest of the audience had started to gain importance. They had to write the vignette thinking of a group of students in high school or in primary school. So they had to adapt what they were reading about history of science and philosophy of science to an audience that was not in university or in college. The final version of the rubric, I don't expect you to read that, had this format. We had a lot of different questions, ranging from formal ones, the things we have talked about, orthography, proper citation, Whiggish or not Whiggish, to be or not to be Whiggish was a heavy issue with them. Emotional use of language, whether it was warranted or not, and in which cases. It got quite complex, as you can see. So how does this tale end so far? 5 groups started work on the vignettes. These are the cases they chose. Florentino Ameghino, that's an American scientist of the 19th century that corresponded with Darwin and worked on different things, a lot of what we would call today paleontology, and he had a thesis on the origin of the American man. So students take that story and worked on what it means to be a pioneer in a field and what happens when you make an error in science, a well-meant error, because the ideas of Ameghino, so about the origins of American man, have been proven false in the 20th century. But was he, did he do this work on bad faith? Was he a mediocre scientist? These were questions that they formulated and were interesting to deal on. Lysenko, the case of Lysenko, and they worked on science and politics and the problem of demarcation. Then Bernardo Husey. Bernardo Husey is a Nobel Prize, it's a local Nobel Prize. He founded the CONICET, that is like the GAPIS or something like that. So they worked on science and politics, and this group addressed the issue of animal rights, because Husey made a lot of experiments on living animals, and they were worried about that. I don't have an image of the 4th team. That was the virus Junin. That's an orphan illness of Argentina, an hemorrhagical fever. And this was interesting because they had there a clear case of rival hypothesis and a case of self-experimentation. The scientist survived, but it was touch and go. He inoculated himself with hemorrhagical fever and tested the vaccine. The pill, we had a group of girls that worked about the pill, and they tried to reflect on gendered science, periphery and central countries, and the commodification of science. I don't know if you have heard of this. I guess you did. But one of the first researchers on the pill was a Mexican that worked with a local plant that's called barbasco, and they found an interview with the daughter of this researcher, and that talked about what it is like to have a scientist for a father. So that was an interesting finding. And the last one was of Cesar Milstein, who found out monoclonal antibodies and won also the local Nobel Prize. And then they worked on issues of discovery and of the relationships between science, politics, and society. Milstein had to exile himself during one of the many dictatorships of the 20th century in Argentina. And there was another case that worked on rabies and the Caso Azul. I don't know if you have heard of the Caso Azul. This man, Koprowski, was an Argentinian researcher working in the United States that found out that in Argentina they were testing a virus that combined a recombinant virus of rabies and variolics on cows in the country. And shepherds didn't know what they were dealing with. There was a scandal, and of course Kampourakis lost his career, but the experiment was terminated too. Most students passed the course. Only 2 of them dropped out. That was one group. One group had a middle range note, 7 over 10 possible. The others got high notes. Rewriting of the vignette ranged from 2 to 4 times. The vignettes were presented to the classmates in 2 different meetings. The second encounter was on December. In December, in Argentina, everything goes away because we have finished class and Natal is coming and all that. And anyway, almost everyone was present in this second encounter, even those who already knew that they had passed on the previous reunion. Besides the more explicit results regarding history and philosophy of science issues, the writing of the vignette focused on another part of our framework. We wanted to address disciplinary reading and writing requirements and practices. We felt that an important outcome would be exploring and critically reviewing previous rhetorical practices and developing new relevant competencies. We worked on this framework that made a difference between writing as a general skill that's decontextualized. They had 2 workshops on writing that are decontextualized in the curriculum, but we wanted to work on writing in context, that is an authentic practice of writing. Writing a vignette is something that they might, hopefully will, do when they are teachers. That's a real assignment, not a only didactic contrivance. Writing, we wanted them to feel, is an intellectual process. Writing is an epistemic tool. You think differently when you write than when you read, than when you talk. Writing is a social practice. It means communication. You have to write to communicate to others who are not your teacher. That's totally different, and that was what appeared clearly when they started writing, thinking of an audience of 4th graders or high school adolescents. It's totally different to write for me than for them, because I'm going to grade them, and their students are going to be much, much, much hard on them that I will be. Writing is a rewriting. Writing is always rewriting. So they had to feel that multiple drafts is not a problem. It's the way to go. That's the way to do things, to rewrite. On informal conversations with my friend Alicia, we found that students expressed their perception that by working on the rubric, they had achieved what we may call a clearer metacognitive consideration of their own learning and writing processes. Especially, they had found out that rewriting a test, what I said before, was not a sign of failure, but a necessary step. They had had an opportunity to practice and reflect upon an important feature of their future praxis, such as evaluation and assessment. And they felt that they were on the way to being able to design, implement, and evaluate their own rubrics. On the negative side, and I have to say that, curiously, or perhaps not so curiously, some students posed objections related to authority and peer evaluation. I don't like fellow students looking at my work. That's a quote. We have recently sent an email to all the participants asking them to answer a few questions on last year's experience, but sadly with little success so far. Though I'm optimistic that we will get more answers and so have a little more data to confront with. So thank you very much. I hope I have not been too prolix, and I'm anxious to hear your feedback on this pilot project.
I'm Roberto. I have a question. You presented the kind of material you used, for instance, in the episode of Semmelweis. The historical instance you gave about Semmelweis' work, you used films and text and so on. How long did it take to present that? And did you use other episodes?
Hola? No. We worked around a month on Semmelweis. That's what you were asking. Yes, and they had a lot of work to do at home. They had to read. This was not a class on history of science stricto sensu, but we wanted them to be in touch with different ways of writing about history of science. We couldn't use primary sources in this case because most students don't read in English or in any other language but Spanish. But we chose Semmelweis because we had a lot of material on that, and we could work on what is a rational reconstruction, that's Hempel, and we could read other documents that were more historical, and we found a few unbelievable pieces on terms of Whiggish history and emotional declarations and all that. And we wanted them to see and compare those different ways of addressing the same historical episode. Then they had a wonderful class with one of Marie-Elise students that came and presented to them with the story of Abraham Tremblay. And they could see another way of addressing this. And Felipe, that was our visitor, talked to them about making true, serious historical research aiming at teaching history of biology. And it was really important for them. That was a wonderful class, and they could discuss and hear something that was working really on that. And they had a lot of questions to ask, and they remember that class as one of the better classes of last year. They had a lot of impact on them. That was wonderful. So I think that's what you were aiming at. We don't want them to learn history of science or to be historians of sciences. We had to make choices balancing the depth, the width of what we can do, and the time we have. That's not a lot. So we try to make difficult balances on all that. We know we have a lot of blind spots regarding what's, in my case, especially what's philosophy in an academic sense. Sometimes I feel bad with myself for that. I know we have a lot of blind spots on what it means to do history of science, really, but we have to make all these converge on what they are trying to learn. It's a first step in the right direction. We're not there, clearly.
Anna, it's working. I'm happy to see that it's a comment, it's not a question, and you can comment more if you want. I'm happy to see that you use some local cases, and I think it's very important for the teachers. And now there's a question. I would like to know, how do the teachers feel about having these local scientists as case studies?
They feel amazed to find out there were scientists in Argentina, and they felt amazed to know there were women scientists in Argentina, and they felt amazed to know that Ameghino wrote letters to Darwin and Darwin answered them. So all that, yes, because you can write, but do they answer? So that was very important for us, because they discovered something they didn't know, and they are in their third, fourth year out of 5, they're going to be teachers, and they didn't know there were scientists south of Rio Grande. They usually think science is made in Europe or in the United States, and if you're very, very, very lucky, maybe you can get a burst and go there and be a scientist, but not at home. So that was important for them. One of 2 of them have heard there were 2 Nobel Prizes, and they didn't know there are 3 science Nobel Prizes in Argentina, and they didn't know that. And they are biology or medicine Nobel Prizes, and they didn't know that. And they are biology students. So that was very important for us, and we thought that was a bonus that we were proud to add to our workshop, because we thought that was really important for them as teachers and for the future students also, to know that being a scientist is possible and it's rewarding. And there are normal people that have problems, that sometimes err, that sometimes make mistakes, and other times they find out wonderful things. So that was very important for us, that they can find out that scientists are normal people that do their jobs well. So, yes.
Another question? Okay.
You had a quote from one student that didn't like others reading his work.
Yes.
And you spoke about the importance of writing and rewriting. And I'd like to understand more about how writing and rewriting worked out, and to what extent other students were reading and responding to each other's writing.
Yes. We start with the first draft of the vignette around July, August, and they had their last date due in November. So they had time to make several drafts of their vignette. They had to present drafts. I wrote those drafts and made comments on them. And on 2 occasions during the class, in the workshop, they had to exchange drafts to other groups. And those other groups had to make comments, ask questions, say what they didn't understand, or why is this important, or I don't know why you are saying that, or I don't agree with that other thing, or you didn't notice that you're being Whiggish, and we have been talking about being Whiggish all the first semester, or things like that. Usually they took it quite well, but a few of them, I didn't know that this particular pupil was feeling bad about that. I think I missed something there, because he elaborated on that and said something something like, sometimes people is cruel. So I think he may have got some comment that he felt hurt about. But he didn't say anything about that, and I never noticed it. And I'm sorry for that. But that was a particular case. And others said, and that was 3 or 4, said, no, but the teacher must say what's right and what's wrong. Which is strange, because they are going to be teachers. I don't know if they don't like having to take the responsibility, or they want to have a lot of authority later, so they don't want me to say to them, well, maybe you can negotiate with your students. Regarding rewriting, they had to present 3 drafts, at least. And they may present a 4th one if the work was well below expected standards. And the idea was, a first draft, that they lose the fear of the blank sheet. And then I gave feedback on that, and they gave it back to me. And then I gave new feedback on that. And if we were satisfied, they and I were satisfied, that was that. And if there were things to polish, so they had to rewrite again. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but it's very rewarding. And it was important for them and for me to make it very clear that rewriting was not a punishment. And many of them discovered that rewriting meant rethinking. They had to restructure. It was not just a case of, well, you forgot to put an accent here or there, there is a capital letter missing. But the ideas changed in the rewriting, and that was very important for them, and that was something I wished would happen. And I was very happy when it happened. The teacher they had in didactics of biology, in biology teaching, has a PhD, and her thesis is on writing and rewriting in biology teaching. So when we are in parallel, that's great, because they can talk to her about what they're doing with me, and then they talk with me about what they're doing with her, and that's inertia. we grow together on that, and that's very good. So that's why I deplore when someone can't keep their paces, because they miss that part.
How many students? I don't know if you mentioned.
26, 25, 26, 30. That depends on the year, and sometimes I lose some of them through the year. This is a very difficult year because we have some problems because the government of Buenos Aires is trying to open a new university, so the Instituto del Profesorado are very angry with that. So we go from greve to greve. That's hard this year.
And you were alone with your colleagues?
I was alone. Alicia has another course with more or less the same number of students. Yes.
Yeah, I'm making. It's not the same experience, but I'm teaching a course, and I'm asking every week a small text from them, and for each week I attribute different perspective for that.
So
text.
it's growing.
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
Kind of just to not vitiate in the same task. And the biggest problem is the time to read all of this and correct and give this. So what I'm trying to do is what you did, that is make themselves correct and suggest on the other, because with this, when we take the text, it's much easier to go through.
I think we think that they are going to be not only teachers, but hopefully educational researchers. So they have to learn to read each other, to talk to each other, to make careful, caring criticism. So I had a failure there. I didn't know someone was not being caring with his classmate. But I think that's part also of what they are learning to do. They are going to evaluate sometime, so they're starting to evaluate each other. And they are going to present in a conference sometime, so they have to start to learn how to listen to someone, discuss what someone is saying, learn from each other. I think that has this positive outcome that I don't have to read them all weeks, but it has also a more substantial importance that I think they're learning something important in reading each other's work, in commenting each other's work, in learning to peer evaluate. That's the first step to peer evaluation. We all hate that, but we have to learn to do it. And that was important for me. And it has the bonus that, well, I can manage. That's not the only course I'm giving, and I can manage the workload by distributing it with them. That's true too. Yes.
Anyone? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Professor.